The only way you can strive for objectivity as a writer is if you lie. By lying, you shield yourself from the scrutiny of subjectivity.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Hey guys, KinoFlex here, and in today's video, I'm going to be responding to a video from a breadtuber with an axe to grind against Mahler, the critical drinker, and most importantly, the concept of objective criticism itself. Now, when you come across a video essay attempting to refute or debunk someone else, you would expect them to go over the specific stance the video essayist seeks to refute. For this particular video essay, does this guy do that? No, not really. What he ends up doing instead is going after straw men, such as claiming that the people he's responding to believe that there is no room for subjectivity, which is a stance neither Mahler or Drinker have ever expressed, and have repeatedly established to not be the case whenever these exact criticisms are brought up time and time again.
But here lies the issue. The Right Opinion and I would not be discussing Rags' video if the issue at hand was just that he doesn't like The Last Jedi and other people do. The problem is that his thesis statement is essentially that other people are not allowed to disagree with his opinion.
Bullshit.
Yeah, I don't think Rag said that, but go ahead, show me a clip.
Yeah.
Show me a clip, Quinton.
Because his opinion is on a higher playing field than...
Yeah, this is why Clinton... This is why Quinton's a fucking scumbag.
Yeah, he's a piece of shit.
Yeah, Quinton's a piece of shit. This is the kind of thing that the piece of shit does. People like Quinton, they don't seek to understand. It's not they don't value the pursuit of knowledge in the same way. To say that that's my thesis statement is absolutely ridiculous. To say that nobody's allowed to enjoy it is absolutely ridiculous.
Hey, Rex, remember how at the beginning of all EFAPs you're like, this will be fun because you guys get to hear my perspective, which is on a higher playing field than everyone else's.
Oh,
you know how you say that all the time?
That's why I always start them out like that, because I know that my opinion is the objective standard by which we judge quality. And anything that deviates from my opinion is on the spectrum of incorrect.
And yeah, so for people who are like, this is a really long stream, it's like, yeah, well, this video gets worse as you progress, and this is part of the shit that needed to be responded to in terms of just, fuck you, Quinton. Stop telling people that this is what we actually do when it's not.
This is and right at the video, someone pointed out in chat, at the beginning of the fucking video that this is a response to, I say it's okay if you liked it.
Exactly, but that doesn't count.
So
none of that counts.
Even though I specifically say something, Quinton can come in with his big ass brain and his compensation beard and his yellow teeth and say that there's some what I really mean is something that's completely opposite to something that I stated.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating, because this is the thing, this is the core of what you could call me and Rags is like, the way we assess in general. So like, this isn't just art, or this is like our day-to-day. We'll break up what things are happening versus how people are feeling about the things. You know, information's really important, and then how people feel about it's really important. And so to just say, Rags and Mahler, they go about their lives thinking that they're better than everyone else because they have better playing fields in which they have a... It's just like, fuck you, man.
And I guess we'll have to keep restating it over and over because people like Quinton will keep taking it out of context, or they'll just make shit up like he does here in a malicious way. It is really easy to get it, but we'll keep saying it over and over. You can feel however you want about anything. You can feel whatever you want to feel about The Last Jedi or The Predator or Jurassic World or frickin' Mary Poppins. It doesn't matter. You can feel however you want, and we can never take that away from you, and you're not wrong for feeling a certain way.
Everyone else's. Or to put it like he likes to, his opinions are objective.
No.
Let's be honest, Rags. An opinion can be objective. It is possible.
And an opinion. It's true. It's not the way he means, but
no, of
yes,
course.
an opinion can be objective, but it is not objective because it is someone's opinion.
If I say, in my opinion, the sun is a star, is that objective or is that my feelings? How does that work?
Yes, it can be both. It is my opinion that 2 + 2 = 4. That's objectively true, but it's objectively true through mathematics. It's not objectively true
because you feel it.
Because I feel that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
There can be overlap.
The simple deconstruction. You're not going to catch me in Rags saying, in my opinion, The Last Jedi has inconsistencies, because it's provable. We don't need to say it's
Yes,
our opinion.
We can demonstrate this regardless isn't a word, regardless of what our opinion is. It's just that our opinion happened to line up to something that we can objectively show and demonstrate.
But what he's selling here is that me and Rags will literally like watch a film, go, I didn't really enjoy that much, and then he's like, oh, so it's objectively a bad film, and we'll be like, what?
What?
I understand that was a long clip, but it's necessary to include so we can properly flesh out Mahler's stance, because despite this video being presented as a refutation towards him and his ideas, there is a whopping total of 0 clips or statements from him included in this response, which is pretty egregious considering this is how the video is presented. I'm going to be completely honest. This entire video is pretty much garbage from beginning to end, because it becomes instantly redundant when you watch the first part of Mahler's Force Awakens review, where he dedicates an entire section explaining exactly what he means by reviewing something objectively. If you're making a video like this and you're not responding to this specific video where Mahler lays out his entire philosophy on a silver platter, then it's safe to assume that you aren't exactly approaching this topic in good faith and are just looking to virtue signal to an audience that already despises him and other critics like him. But more importantly, he doesn't seem to understand the difference between facts and value judgments, which is the entire reason for why I'm even making this video, to point out that distinction and explain why it's perfectly reasonable to form and strengthen value judgments from established facts within a story when reviewing it.
When it comes to the exploration of reality through art, there is no distinction between what is true and false.
He starts off his video filleting some playwright named Harold Pinter, who looks as though he was dug up from some crypt to serve as an overarching authority he points to throughout his video, but is ironically irrelevant because nothing he really says refutes Drinker or Mahler's approach to criticism that much, if at all. The playwright highlights the importance ambiguity can have on storytelling, which is not something either Mahler or Drinker disagree with. They simply point out how ambiguity is not an excuse for a story suffering in its quality depending on how the ambiguity is executed, since it's a tool that can be both applied well and misapplied. A good example of this sentiment being expressed would be Mahler's praise for No Country for Old Men, which relies heavily on ambiguity.
But on the contrary, I had a very love-hate relationship with this film at first. Oh, is he going to say the thing that everyone who doesn't like this movie says?
Oh, you didn't like
I didn't like the ending.
Did you not like the ending?
I don't even know what people said about that, so I'm curious now.
Well, so, I mean, to explain what I'm trying to say before we read on, is that everyone who doesn't like No Country for Old Men, the first thing they'll say is, I don't know, that ending wasn't very good. The ending was bad. It was, you know, you set up this whole plot of, like, you know, hero versus villain, and then you have it all end off screen. That's, I don't know about that. I don't know. I didn't like that. Really liked it up to then, but didn't like that. That's the thing. That's what everyone says. No mention of the intentions, the writing, the themes, obviously, the subversive elements that the Coens are fucking is practically stitched into their artistic merit is that they subvert. That's like their whole thing. If you're going to watch them or Fincher, because we mentioned him recently, you should expect an ending that's going to throw you off. That's what always happens.
Yeah, I will say, like, maybe this is partially in Stuckman's defense, but like the first time I watched No Country for Old Men, I overall liked the movie, but I didn't like the ending. And then as I rewatched it, now it's one of my favorite movie endings of all time, because I understand now what it was doing. Sort of this illustration of a man who feels so out of place, and he feels like the world is sort of evolving without him. He has no guiding marker. He has no mentor. And as a cop, it's like crime is evolving to this point where it's just like, I don't even know what to do, how to behave.
Yeah, he's used to small town stuff. He's getting this hugely violent and intricate, like all kinds of insane shit happening. He's not ready for. It's not the world he belonged to. It's an amazing film. Honestly, we should praise it more when we get the chance on the.
And of course, the subversion of you build up Anton as this unstoppable, like almost supernatural force that's pursuing Josh Brolin, and you're so focused on that it almost makes you forget about the other people who are also looking for the money, to where it's like, oh shit, yeah, like he's dead because there were other people who were trying to get him, and of course he is, because what chance did he really have of succeeding here when he had this many people gunning for him? Like that's a bold choice. It's very uncommon. It's very subversive.
Well, I love the POV of Tommy Lee Jones's character entering the final battle post-battle. And just being
Exactly.
like, what the fuck has happened here? Jesus, this is insane. How is this even happening? I'm not ready for it. Like, all of it comes so into focus.
And then, of course,
is changing.
the fact that Anton is defeated by bad luck, potentially defeated by it, because we don't know for sure, but that the person who's been this incredibly calculating operator throughout the whole film, incredibly precise, seemingly
the
unstoppable.
world's in his control almost, but then
well, yeah, car crash, because the world is not in your control. The world
he
is
ran a stop
chaotic
sign.
and unpredictable. Yeah.
That's what happens when you run a stop sign in a suburb.
Even if you rely on ambiguity in your story, that doesn't make it immune to objective criticism or analysis, because stories open to interpretation still have factual elements within the story along with meaningful communication aimed at the audience to establish what's even going on. But what's weird is that I don't think this guy was even necessarily of the opinion that ambiguity is an absolute defense against criticism depending on how it's applied, considering he still held himself to standards to ensure that the ambiguity was executed in a way to complement his stories from what I've read about him. He even said to not rely on it in a story if it doesn't make sense. But even if this wasn't the case, I still don't see how that proves the argument that objective criticism in the arts doesn't exist, because it would be a contradiction that undermines itself on both fronts. If your argument is simply your subjective personal preference, then it doesn't disprove anything. But if your argument is objectively true, then objective truth about criticism does exist. So how can you possibly be correct when your own argument collapses on itself?
There are multiple possible interpretations of any given piece of art. Each interpretation can stand up to different levels of scrutiny, and different interpretations may clash with authorial intent, but that does not necessarily make them outright false. I think a good example would be Mulan. One reading of the film would be that women can do anything men can do, especially when given the same resources and instruction to succeed. Another reading would be that Mulan is an allegory for the trans experience, particularly in her musical number, "When Will My Reflection Show Who I Am Inside?" It is only when Mulan experiences gender from a different lens that she finds herself. Both of these readings are valid. They both stand up to some level of scrutiny regardless of what the writers behind Mulan intended, and the reason both of these readings are valid is because of the power of subjectivity. A trans person who watches Mulan would probably experience the film from a different subjective lens than I would. Both myself and this trans person would bring different outlooks to the film when it came time to interpret, and that's okay. One reading might have more evidence behind it, but that's not to say that either interpretation is unvaluable. Both have value in their own way.
So this argument has to do with death of the author, which is a concept I agree with to an extent, considering there are instances where someone can understand a work better than even the author themselves. But where I differ is this idea that the author's interpretation is always invalid, or that all interpretations are equally valid, because that's just simply not the case, with the trans Mulan interpretation being a good example of a bad interpretation. The entire story of Mulan is about the titular female main character embracing the fact that she is a woman, while living in a patriarchal society who can accomplish feats as a woman, despite being different compared to the men.
I knew there was something wrong with you. A woman!
Even though she dresses up as the opposite sex, she doesn't question her biological sex or thinks that she's not a woman. So the idea of it being a trans allegory is such a nonsensical statement, especially since what she was doing is cross-dressing, not trying to become a man. If anything, someone can come along and argue that's more in line with an anti-trans or detransitioner interpretation, since the message is all about feeling free to express yourself how you are in the body you were born with. And you can't just respond by saying, oh, well, it's just another difference of interpretation, because these two interpretations are at direct odds with each other. So how can you settle which one is correct over the other? Obviously, you contrast them with the actual story to see which one is more accurate. No interpretation is completely unvaluable, but that still doesn't mean that you can't evaluate one to be better than the other using facts and evidence found in the work you are interpreting in the first place. If you were to have an idea of an original trans storyline while watching Mulan and use that as inspiration, that'd be one thing. But you're making a claim about the movie that just isn't true.
We should avoid binaries or an idea of an absolute view of reality.
What I said was true, from a certain point of view. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard!
Okay, then you can just have a hierarchy or a system equivalent to it when it comes to the accuracy of an interpretation of a work.
Just to hammer this point home a little further, another good example of what I'm talking about is My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun by Emily Dickinson. When my teacher showed my class this poem for the first time, she presented us with 6 possible interpretations and basically had us weigh them against each other. This could potentially be a poem about man's relationship with God, a poem about slavery, a poem about the process of writing and creativity, a poem about masculinity, a poem about fighting in a war, a poem about sexuality and pleasure, and those are just 6 possibilities out of many. And the thing is, I don't think we can pin down any definitive reading.
Why not? Like I said, you can simply weigh these interpretations against each other to see which one is the most aligned with the actual poem, but you're simply unwilling to do that because you don't want to invalidate another person's opinion.
There truly is no accounting for taste in art. A person's subjective life experience is going to have an effect on the way they criticize a piece of art and on the way they interpret a piece of art. It's kind of impossible to separate interpretation from criticism.
Sure, you can't completely separate criticism from interpretation, but you can improve your interpretation to have better overall criticisms. It's the same underlying principle as education, where the goal is to refine a person's ability to interpret, analyze, and critically evaluate information.
But Kino, have you considered that not all educators are the same and that some can be bad?
Sure, but that doesn't mean education is unnecessary or that we disregard everything we're supposed to learn. How we respond to people repeating incorrect information is through critical engagement by asking various questions determining where the faulty perspective came from, whose lens shaped it, and how it aligns or conflicts with our own experiences. Evaluation always rests on some understanding of what the work in question is doing.
Yes, this is a video about objectivity in art, but it's also a critique of certain critics on this platform, people like Mahler and the Critical Drinker. I think the problem with a lot of objective critics is that they want to pinpoint a truth, but they aren't concerned with the search for truth.
Do you have any receipts showing that this is what either of them believe? Or are you just making shit up out of thin air because that's easier to argue against? The answer is that he doesn't have any, so I took the liberty of asking both Drinker and Mahler that question myself.
Kinoflix. Drinker and Mahler, I'm working on a video and I want to know how you would respond to critics saying that you want to pinpoint a truth but aren't concerned with the search for it. What?
Pinpoint a truth but aren't concerned with the search for it. So like we're looking for whatever would back our preconceived notion of what's happening versus looking unbiasedly and just arriving at whatever truth there may be.
Well, that's one interpretation of it. Or is it like I just want to make judgments about a film or whatever without providing sufficient evidence to back up my assertions? I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to interpret that.
It just sounds like another way of saying you guys are biased. And I'd just be like, well, I disagree. And that I can't resist, having lived in a universe as a flesh human creature with the, perception of time being linear, that I understand how things are going to go because I've seen how things have gone. And I would say that me and Drinker have been pretty solid on predicting how things are going to go with certain films, based on producers, writers, directors, and time and companies and studios, but that simultaneously we've been very wrong on a whole bunch of stuff, and we're happy to be like, wow, that's a great surprise. I'm really glad that turned out that way.
Yeah.
And vice versa. We've hoped, fucking remember 28 years later, we're like, that trailer looks bitchin'. We got every reason to believe this is going to be an awesome movie. It was like, oh,
yeah.
Okay. And that's the thing. It's, all I can say ultimately about any of that is just either you believe we're being genuine or you believe we're doing it for some other reason. And we can't really help you at that point. We can only tell you what we believe we're doing this for.
Yeah, ultimately, like we're the only people who know our own minds, and like we can't force you to accept any of that stuff. But yeah, I would say just go by our track records and like the consistency that we have with this stuff. If you're happy with that, then great. If not, well, then maybe you need to look for other people.
I don't think they view language in art as an ambiguous transaction, as an exchange between two parties. I think they view language in art as a one-way delivery. For many critics of the Critical Drinker's ilk, they expect art, particularly movies, to deliver entertainment. And if it fails to do that, it's a bad work, no discussion.
Again, this is another instance of him making a claim without providing any evidence. So I took this as another opportunity to ask this question to the people being discussed, since he provided no evidence to support his characterization of the subjects in his video.
Kinoflex, as additionally for Drinker, do you believe that if a movie fails to be entertaining, then it's a bad work, no discussion? Well, entertaining is a kind of broad term, because for me, a piece of art needs to be engaging, not necessarily entertaining. Like, I'd be engaged by something like Schindler's List, right? I wouldn't say
Right.
I'm necessarily entertained by it. I'm not having the time of my life watching it, but I'm very invested in what's going on there. So
There's also, do they mean entertaining like just for me versus everyone? Because of course, if nobody on Earth was entertained by a film, I'd be like, well, it probably failed. You know, like, but
Yeah.
if we, you know, like, not necessarily like including engagement. Basically, it didn't. Everyone came away saying like, well, that was a waste of time. It's like if everyone does, it's like, well, that's unfortunate. I would actually be really curious to see that film if it's just like paint drying or something.
yeah, and I
but-
think even then there's a discussion to be had about, well, why was it so unentertaining? Where did it go wrong?
Yeah, but I was also going to say, like, if I'm not entertained, but everyone else is, I'd be like, well, the film's doing something, I guess. That just prompts us to try and understand what happened, you know?
Yeah, and I think even that like makes for the basis of an interesting thought process or an interesting discussion. Is like, well, I hated this thing, but the majority of other people really liked it. Like, okay, well, let's examine why that happened. Like, is it because of some flaw in my reasoning, or is it just purely like a preference thing, or what?
Yeah.
Because I think you and I have both encountered movies, not so much that we hated them, but more just like, okay, intellectually, we know that they're well constructed, well acted, well written, all that sort of thing. But they're just like, we don't really care about them.
Yeah.
You know, one way or the other. It's just like, well, that's the emotional component of like that film is good. I recognize that. It just didn't personally appeal to me. But that's fine. Like, we're still humans at the end of the day. We're allowed to have preferences in terms of what we enjoy. But then we can move beyond that to like say, well, okay, if I was to analyze this movie objectively, is it still good? That's then the other discussion you can have.
Yeah, 100%.
This is a video that's supposed to be a refutation to their ideas, but the guy who made it has no idea what their ideas even are.
But entertainment too is subjective, obviously. Unfortunately, these types of critics view art through such a narrow lens, but they don't truly engage with it. They don't want to search for truth, they simply want truth delivered to them in their preferred way. Now, at this point in the video, you're probably saying something like, okay, but surely there are actual objective technical measures for art, right? And sure, for example, if a fiction writer uses improper punctuation, that's an objective technical error on their part. Or in the movie Lady Ballers, as Some More News' video on the movie points out, there's a moment at the very beginning of the film where we see a technical error in the use of eye lines.
Oh my god, the ramblings from this guy are completely unbearable. It may sound as though he's being reasonable at first since he's saying that there are in fact some objective elements to art, but it's the complete opposite because he intentionally picks a really shitty example for the purpose of further undermining it, as if these are ever the lone reasons for why people who believe in objective criticism believe something to be bad. Lady Ballers as a film is garbage, but I sincerely doubt most people who share those sentiments dislike it primarily because of a single technical error. I know for a fact that's not why the guy bringing it up considers it to be bad, it's simply because it doesn't align with his politics. People who apply objective criticism typically point out many more, if not bigger, objective flaws that are found everywhere within a piece of art because countless things about art are capable of being objectively measured. You can objectively determine the number of frames an individual film has. You can objectively determine the number of words a book has. You can objectively conclude whether a painting has been made using oil or watercolor. You can objectively determine whether a scene in a film is graded with a specific color. You can objectively determine which chords a piece of music uses. The list goes on. Generally speaking, what is meant by a film being objectively well directed is it being able to convey a lot of information clearly and quickly by establishing plot, character, tone, theme, and whatever else all at once, instead of only showing one aspect of storytelling at a time, or completely failing to communicate any of it effectively, which would be considered a failure since proper communication is key.
How's it going, guys? I just wanted to deal with this comment, and this isn't to pick on Matt, but just it's a good teaching point in regards to art and objectivity, and that art is objective. Matt says, I think in a way art is subjective. You're attempting to connect with another person emotionally through art, which is always going to be a subjective process. And to this I disagree, because art is a form of communication. Communication would be impossible if we were incapable of referencing transcendent universals that exist outside of our mind. Me communicating to you right now would be impossible. What I'm saying would just be pure gibberish, and you wouldn't be able to understand me if forms of communication were relative, because we'd be only referencing things that are relative or subjective within our own mind. Yet when we communicate, we do generally understand each other. So therefore, I mean, art is the same way. Art is a form of communication. Therefore, art is referencing transcendent universals, and thus it's going to be reliant on objectivity in order to communicate properly. Otherwise, there'd be no point to making it. There'd be no point at all. We wouldn't be able to communicate anything. So art is objective.
At the same time, what's generally meant by good writing is creating an internally consistent story that provides both emotionally and intellectually satisfying setups and payoffs, instead of creating something inconsistent where the conclusions are not based off of anything established earlier in the story. Tommy Wiseau can say that his movie The Room was meant to be a comedy, but it very clearly wasn't. This is by no means the all-encompassing standard, but it's a start at the very least, which is preferable than just shrugging your shoulders and say that none of this can be figured out and that no film can ever accomplish bigger feats than something like The Room.
You are lying! I never hit you! You are tearing me apart, Lisa!
The very creation of art is to take a concept that only exists in the abstract and to try to turn it into something tangible and concrete. It takes skill to be able to create good art and to effectively shape the ideas in your head through the medium of your choice. The results can be measured both as art and as a display of verifiable technical skill. How we establish quality is by asking what the art in question was supposed to achieve, and how well it was achieved using all of these objective standards we have determined previously through trial and error. You can act as though history had never occurred when it comes to the creation of the wheel, but anyone who knows history and refuses to play along won't lower their standards to pretend that you invented it instead.
But the thing is, the rules change all the time. What might be considered objectively good artistry in one day and age can change in as few as 10 years. There's actually this comment from a Critical Drinker video that I think puts it quite well. Quote, "I say this as a longtime subscriber and fan, I think you're kind of wrong on the topic of themes. Before that, what I agree on. Themes aren't a get out of making a good film free card, themes aren't a substitute for a good story, themes aren't the same as narrative. What I disagree on, that film has an objective standard. I would rather say film has a collectively negotiated preference that is colloquially called good filmmaking. What makes one camera movement, distance, or lens type better than another? Nothing objectively, but rather the subjective effect the combination of composition, lighting, scale, and depth has as we traverse a story, or sometimes a non-story or an anthology. If it were objective, objections would more quickly be settled when discussing things like narrative or cinematography. I don't just mean in the YouTube sphere, I mean even among cinematographers and film historians." Unquote. I really want to emphasize that idea of a collectively negotiated preference. I think this is something that's true for pretty much all art forms, and again, it's something that changes decade after decade.
I want to point out two things about this comment he highlights. The first is that he completely disregards what the comment has to say about themes because he doesn't actually care about it for anything other than disagreeing with Drinker. And the second is that what he is describing is literally what everyone including Drinker means by objectivity. I know I can't prove this, but I would not be surprised if this guy saw how people use sophistry in debates thinking it was a genius tactic, when anyone with a brain sees it as a dipshit scrambling to not address a point they can't refute.
Because I hear a lot of these words will be like, it was a lot of people.
Well, hold on.
I was like, what does that mean? Yeah.
I'm explaining it. So
Okay.
more people in 35 years than 2,000 years, that sounds like quite a lot of people. Is
Not
that fair?
necessarily, no.
Is that fair?
No, not really, right?
There's no such thing as a change that is too drastic too quickly because, well, everything changes. This is actually postmodernism. Now he's going to try and attack the very concept of unprecedented. Everything is unprecedented. Therefore, the word unprecedented does not mean anything.
Everything definitionally is unprecedented as you move forward in years. We have an unprecedented amount of technology, an unprecedented amount of energy generation, an unprecedented amount of
I think you might be confused about the meaning of the word unprecedented.
So
Yes,
it's a bit reductive to say, like, well, we have an unprecedented wave of whatever. There's unprecedented things happening definitionally every year forward into the future we go.
No, that's
Yes,
not true. One of the most amazing things of arguing with anybody from your position is the extent to which they refuse to understand what words mean. I just explained to you repeatedly what unprecedented means. It means that it hasn't happened before.
Nobody who talks like this is ever interested in trying to find the truth. It's a strategy used to evade accountability towards their beliefs being challenged. The exact same tactic is being used here when it comes to trying to invalidate the idea of objectivity in criticism. What he's doing here is trying to argue that our standards of what we consider to be good and bad art is socially constructed, so that automatically invalidates it somehow. But just because something is a social construct does not mean it is not objective. For example, think of measurements. The length of an inch is a social construct, but it is still an objective measurement. There is no reason for an inch being the length that it is, other than all of us collectively agreeing to define it that way. But within that framework, it is entirely objective, as we can precisely measure the length of any object in inches. When it comes to our standard and the quality of art, there are various aspects of art that are rooted in reality the same way. For instance, the entire reason music sounds pleasing to us is because the ratios of certain sound waves are found to be universally aesthetically pleasing. A perfect fourth or fifth interval isn't just satisfying because we happen to randomly like it, it is satisfying because it is proven mathematically to be perfect. As far as we know, you cannot have a universe where a perfect fifth interval isn't satisfying without completely changing the fabric of reality as we know it.
Perfect fifth now, and another good universal example for this one, which is the Star Wars theme. Theme tunes are really good for this sort of thing because most people recognize the really popular ones, and this time it is when the main melody kicks in. So it's that. That very first movement. That's your perfect fifth. And other examples would be either Twinkle Twinkle or the Alphabet, which use just the same tune. Again, that first movement is a fifth, and one final one would be the initial vocal melody in Can't Help Falling in Love by Elvis. So when he says take my hand, it's the movement between take and my, so...
Many films and books that were classics in their own time are all but forgotten today.
The quality of something is not determined by how popular it is. You're also completely overlooking timeless classics that still stand the test of time today. If anything, this sentiment goes to show how far we've fallen in appreciating well-made art that we just mindlessly consume, only to dismiss it later because it's not what is currently being talked about, as if it's a mere trend.
What's more, artists can intentionally break the rules all the time. There are lots of movies that intentionally mess with eye lines. Does that make them bad?
Okay, and what if it was done unintentionally and failed to meet the purpose of what was trying to be accomplished? What if the camera is slightly out of focus the entire time? Or if you can't hear the dialogue because of loud noises? There are many obvious mistakes that can happen in films, and most of them would be better off without them. Films are made to fulfill a purpose. If they fail to meet that purpose, then they can be considered objectively bad.
In the Critical Drinker's case, he believes that theme and interpretation really shouldn't matter when it comes to critique. Except for when they should. I did a whole video on it, go check it out if you want, but to refresh your memory, he says,
talking endlessly about themes also allows you to neatly avoid engaging with actual criticism of the film, having to use your brain to explain away all the problems and inconsistencies, or even worse, facing up to the terrifying prospect that maybe it's just not as good as you've somehow convinced yourself it is. You don't have to worry about any of that, because your understanding of the movie transcends simple stuff like plot structure, internal consistency, and character development.
These are interesting technical aspects to bring up, because I would argue that plot structure, internal consistency, and character development are all somewhat subjective metrics as well, at least to some extent.
A lot of you guys ask me why I find myself defending Drinker on this channel despite disagreeing with him from time to time. And it's because of shit like this. It's a phenomenon I like to call critical drinker derangement syndrome, where the guy can say something perfectly reasonable, but he gets attacked for it simply because he's a critical drinker. If you only find yourself praising or defending the themes of a story instead of the actual story itself, especially to the degree where you hand wave away other important aspects that can be criticized, then you're not really defending the movie, but an abstract collection of ideas you acquired from the movie. You can just say that the film gave you inspiration while still acknowledging its flaws.
For example, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel is a book that structures its plot very unconventionally, and I love it for that. However, a lot of other people dislike this book for the way it delivers its narrative.
Okay, that's great, but as we've established, even stories that choose to be told unconventionally still have to abide by known storytelling rules in order to be properly understood and conveyed. Pulp Fiction is an unconventionally told story that is widely regarded as a masterpiece. Do you think that's well regarded simply because it's unconventional?
Or in terms of character development, some people might look at a static character and think it's bad the character doesn't change. Others would say that's intentional and it works. It depends on the story, doesn't it? As for inconsistency, I think there are certain objective inconsistencies we can find in stories. For example, if we return to Mulan, we see that Mulan is initially dismissed from her service because she fails to measure up to the physical demands placed upon her. But if you'll recall, Mulan is only there so her father doesn't have to be. Her father, who has a physical impairment and surely also wouldn't measure up to the physical demands required of him. But does that inconsistency actually detract from the experience of the film? I would say no, and the majority of viewers would agree.
Well, they would agree it's not an issue because this isn't an objective inconsistency. Though admittedly, it does sound contradictory if you don't understand all the details of the story. The imperial decree at the start of the film simply requires that one man per household enlist in the army to fight against the Huns.
By order of the Emperor, one man from every family must serve in the imperial army.
The Emperor's advisor who enforces the decree doesn't conduct a medical evaluation at this stage, which is how Mulan is able to pretend to be a man to take her father's place as a new recruit. This matters because Mulan's father is established to be a veteran soldier, so he wouldn't be placed in the same squadron led by Captain Li Shang, which was made up of new recruits he was training. Instead, he was much more likely to be drafted to the army led by General Li that ends up getting wiped out by the Huns, which validates Mulan's decision to enlist in the first place. You also have to take into account how Mulan didn't know that people would have potentially sent Mulan's dad back home had he displayed himself to be physically unfit for battle, which can be explained in universe since she is not a soldier. So as a call to action to get the story started, it still works.
However, inconsistencies get more subjective than that. For example, Luke's characterization in The Last Jedi. A lot of folks would argue that Luke's behavior in this movie is completely inconsistent with everything we know about him. Other folks would argue the opposite, however. Who is right in that scenario? Well, who could objectively say? Luke is supposed to be a living person with complex thoughts and emotions, no? How do we know for certain how he would behave in any set of circumstances?
This is, without a doubt, one of the laziest cop-out defenses I've seen for The Last Jedi. And that's really saying something because there have been a lot of bad arguments defending it over the years. But before I entertain this out-of-season April Fool's joke with a response, I just want to ask the guy making this video if he has even bothered doing any research into why people have a problem with Luke's character assassination in the first place. Do you really think that if this criticism were presented to someone like Mahler or anyone else with his grievances, they would be sufficiently convinced? Because if you actually bothered to hear out the arguments they made, you would realize that this point has already been addressed countless times already.
Luke is a completely different character. Not even the people who love the film disagree with this. The defense always amounts to, yes, but it still makes sense. But does it?
There is good in him. I felt it. He won't turn me over to the Emperor. I can save him. I can turn him back to the good side.
We gotta help her.
They're my friends. I gotta help them. I have to try.
Get off my island.
Does it make sense that Luke Skywalker would give up on training Jedi he worked to resurrect? Does it make sense that Luke Skywalker would give up on the Jedi as a whole despite what he learned about the balance and the actual history that took place in the prequels? Does it make sense that Luke Skywalker would give up on the galaxy he fought so hard to save? Does it make sense that Luke Skywalker would lose every one of his character traits that make him the figure that millions looked up to? Does it make sense that Luke Skywalker would give up on his family? That Luke would abandon them? Does it make sense that Luke Skywalker became a fearful coward, a hermit man, a tired, grumpy, old, damp sock, asking that we allow him to run away so he can be alone and die? Luke has been gutted and poached in order to function as a springboard for the new heroes. He is the husk they will emerge from. Rey is better than Luke. She is more powerful, more morally righteous, more ambitious, more thoughtful, kinder. She's everything he should have been. But Luke actually earned those traits. And now they belong to her, for free. No training, no tests, no trials, no tribulation. Luke has been provided a very classic case of character assassination. And it's devastating for long-time viewers because not only is it something that we don't want to see, but it is given no meaningful or developed reasoning. None of this makes sense.
For someone who repeatedly criticizes other people for not caring about the search for truth, you have displayed yourself as being deeply incurious and actually seeking out answers to the questions you're asking. Instead of having a back and forth by actually engaging with the ideas presented, you seem more interested in trying to prevent any discussion from taking place at all. Moving on to my own explanation, the answer to the question of how we can possibly know how he would behave in any set of circumstances is very simple. We acknowledge what has been previously shown and established. For this particular circumstance, we simply need to compare how Luke acted in a previous film. In Return of the Jedi, Luke refuses to kill his father, Darth Vader, a mass murderer responsible for countless deaths because he believes that Vader still has good in him, even after everything he did. and was proven right despite everyone around him saying otherwise, including the people he idolized. However, in TLJ, Luke attempts to murder his nephew Ben Solo after simply being shown a vision of him potentially turning evil. That's the catalyst for the sequel trilogy, which sets all of the events in motion, and there's no coherent explanation for it. How can Luke go from forgiving a guy who is practically Space Hitler to not giving a chance to someone he loves who did absolutely nothing wrong at this point? And this is just one of many complaints you can raise about his character assassination. But at this point, it's almost been a decade, and to this day, nobody has been able to put forth an acceptable defense for why this is actually genius writing. What pisses me off the most about this stupid argument is that he's not even making a coherent defense for the character assassination. He's simply saying that someone can potentially come along to make a coherent defense for it, as if that's a sufficient replacement for the defense he never even put forward. He's calling people wrong, but is just passing the responsibility to someone else to prove his point for him. Can a work of art be completely judged objectively? No. But individual aspects of the art can be judged as having achieved certain things. Someone can say that Two Girls, One Cup is better than a film like Schindler's List, but that doesn't mean Schindler's List doesn't have better acting, cinematography, themes, or whatever else I can think of. Someone always has the opportunity to make the case that Two Girls, One Cup is a better work of art than Schindler's List in terms of quality, but that doesn't change the likelihood of that claim actually being proven extremely small. But if you want to make the case that Two Girls, One Cup is better than Schindler's List, then go right ahead.
Now, some of my more dedicated viewers will probably be saying, hang on, didn't you say there was an objective way to critique poetry? And yes, I did. I was wrong.
We do not care.
So while we do judge poetry on the effectiveness and uniqueness of its content, language, and structure, effectiveness and uniqueness mean different things for different people.
Well, it's a good thing we don't need to have everyone's consent for widely accepted artistic standards.
In that same video, I also included this Debunking quote that I love.
The best reviews are entirely subjective, but that doesn't mean you throw objectivity out the window.
What I failed to include was what Debunking says immediately afterwards.
You have to build your case with honest statements that even someone who disagrees with you could relate to.
And remember that, honest statements that anyone could relate to.
Okay, so two things. First, I don't understand how you can call Drinker a bad critic who you claim changes his stance on a movie after gauging the public reception for it with no evidence to support that conclusion, as you do later in your video, only to then glaze Debunking, who is notoriously known to walk back his stances after gauging the public reception with actual examples to point to, where he deliberately plays a game the wrong way to frame it in a negative light that supports his criticisms even if it's not true. Second, what he said regarding relatability in your review makes no sense. I agree that a review should reflect someone's genuine opinion, but if relatability is a main focus, then you are undermining your own perspective. And this is a sentiment shared by those regarded as the very best critics.
I think that, well, I know that over my typewriter, when I had a typewriter back in the old days, I had a little quotation from a book called The Immediate Experience by Robert Warshaw. And he said about film criticism, a man goes to the movies and the critic must be honest enough to admit that he is that man. Of course, you could say man or woman. I mean, he was a little bit sexist, you know. But the point being, you went to the movies. The group didn't go to the movies. Right. A demographic segment didn't go to the movies. Kids didn't go to the movies. Adults didn't go to the movies. You went to the movies. What happened to you? Mm-hmm. And if it happened, you have to admit it. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of critics are almost shy about confessing that they've had any kind of emotional reaction.
Right.
I mean, if you laughed, say you laughed. If you cried, say you cried. If you were bored, say how bored you were. You know, but don't indicate that in a way you were kind of this aloof Olympian figure standing above the groundlings in the audience and observing with amusement their pathetic little reactions, because you were there and the review should communicate what you thought.
What you're talking about there is courage. Now, I know that, and you think about it in occupations, people would say, boy, you guys have a really soft job. It doesn't involve any guts to do what you do. But oddly enough, I think that, and this I think, the stakes are always being raised, no matter how successful you are in our job. And that is, you have to summon up the courage, just as you were saying, to say what you honestly feel. And it's not easy. And we're living now, there's a whole new world called political correctness that's going on. And that is death to a critic to participate in that. Wanting to be liked is another piece of advice I would give.
You've really put your finger on something.
Can I just say one thing? This wanting to be liked, forget even the world of political correctness, just personally, wanting to be liked, wanting to go along with the group. Death to a critic. Take your best shot. I know that this is something that you must say to yourself even now. I know I do all the time. I've been given this lucky break to have a chance to say what I think. If I censor myself, I'm going to regret it. I'm going to regret it.
When you said the words political correctness, all I could think of is a lot of college writers are either working for their student papers or they're writing papers that are going to be read out loud in class or duplicated and passed around in class. Yeah. And political correctness is the fascism of the 90s. It's kind of this rigid feeling that you have to keep your ideas and your ways of looking at things within very narrow boundaries or you'll offend someone.
Right.
Certainly one of the purposes of journalism is to challenge just that kind of thinking.
Sure.
And certainly one of the purposes of criticism is to break boundaries. It's also one of the purposes of art. So that if a young journalist, 18, 19, 20, 21, undergraduate, tries to write politically correctly, what they're really doing is ventriloquism. You see, they're not saying what they think. They're projecting their ideas into another politically correct persona and trying to pretend that that persona reflects their ideas. And that is tragic because what you're doing when you're politically correct is you're training yourself at a very young age to lie.
So instead of relatability, Dunkey should have instead said airtight argumentation that presents a clear explanation of the reviewer's perspective, using examples from what is being reviewed while using coherent reasoning, so that even people who come in wanting to disagree have no choice but to agree. And even if the person still disagrees without explaining where you went wrong with your reasoning, then that's not your fault, but the other person's fault for refusing to concede when they can't counter anything you've said.
The thing is, there's no possible way that any person can remove their biases from any equation. To pretend otherwise would be disingenuous. Rather than trying to measure things objectively, I think better reviews stem from an acknowledgement of one's biases, and an exploration of how those biases were confirmed or challenged by any given work.
While it is true that everyone has a bias, that doesn't mean that you can't review something objectively, because bias itself doesn't invalidate criticism, because you can have a specific perspective, interest, or motivation, and still be correct provided your reasoning and methodology are sound. Bias only becomes an issue if you don't properly acknowledge and account for it.
Anthony Gramuglia mentioned basically this same thing in his video on Mahler. When you try to reduce criticism down to a science, you kind of take away everything that's fun about language arts.
I find it funny that the closest you come to interacting with anything related to Mahler's content in a video criticizing him is pointing to a separate video responding to him when even the guy who made the video admitted that he has good points in his own words.
The art bro, on the other hand, has intellectualized objectivity from existence. In short, the art bro believes himself to be the superior intellectual not in spite of, but because they dismiss half of reality.
This part I find pretty funny because I recently made a video about Mahler where I said that objective criticism is actually not that terrible and Mahler has a lot of good points. I just don't like his attitude, which is really funny. He's trying to argue. I don't argue that objective criticism is a thing that exists when I did.
I also don't see how you take away everything that's fun out of language arts when you take this approach, because it's basic human nature to take things apart in an attempt to understand how they work. If anything, learning more about the skill and craft that goes into making art generally makes you appreciate it more, because you can recognize how much the artist must have worked to create a masterpiece. It's perfectly fine if you find that sort of thing boring, but I don't know why you even want to discuss various forms of art in the first place if it doesn't.
However, according to Pinter, there is one arena where objectivity matters, and a search for truth is far more concrete, when engaging with and writing about politics.
Political theatre presents an entirely different set of problems. Sermonizing has to be avoided at all cost. Objectivity is essential. The characters must be allowed to breathe their own air. The author cannot confine or constrict them to satisfy his own taste or disposition or prejudice. He must be prepared to approach them from a variety of angles, from a full and uninhibited range of perspectives. Take them by surprise, perhaps, occasionally, but nevertheless, give them the freedom to go which way they will. This does not always work.
To illustrate his point further, Pinter points out how political language is typically very unambiguous. It is meant to appear objective to keep people ignorant.
Political language, as used by politicians, does not venture into any of this territory, since the majority of politicians, on the evidence available to us, are interested not in truth, but in power, and in the maintenance of that power. To maintain that power, it is essential that people remain in ignorance, that they live in ignorance of the truth, even the truth of their own lives.
This is such a mic drop quote. Is it any wonder that critics who claim to be objective tend to have a right-wing slant? And do these right-wing critics remain in ignorance of the truth of their own lives?
So we've reached the part found in every video made by a breadtuber where after they've prattled on and on over how common standards are bullshit and shouldn't be applied to them, they proceed to hold other people to those exact same standards they decried, but under a much more unreasonable criteria. It turns out that what makes a movie objectively bad has nothing to do with the quality, but if it has the wrong politics or is simply perceived as having the wrong politics. Why was Captain America Brave New World bad? Because a Jew was in it. Why was the live-action Snow White remake bad? Because a Jew was in it. Why was Scream 7 bad? Because the lady who hates Jews wasn't in it. All of these movies are obviously shit, but come on. This is the type of criticism you'd expect from people who haven't even seen the films and are just going along with what everyone on Twitter is saying. Simply using politics as a criteria for determining quality reduces critical analysis to ideological masturbation. But more importantly, did you notice that little trick he pulled, where Pinter was clearly talking about political sermonizing in general, yet he made it about right-wing politics without Pinter ever mentioning them specifically? He just flat out lies to you and expects you not to notice.
I said this in the Critical Drinker video, but I figure one reason the drinker doesn't want to engage with themes is because he doesn't want to engage in any form of self-examination at all. That's why he can say things like this without an ounce of self-awareness.
When your writing process consists of about 90% political pandering, always in one direction of course, and predetermined rules about which identity groups are allowed to do what, and maybe 10% actual creative storytelling, well, you end up with stuff like The Savant.
So, in addition to not understanding the people he's arguing against, this guy doesn't even seem to understand the guy he's supposedly a huge fan of, because nothing he said contradicted what Drinker just said here in regards to political storytelling. In fact, they more or less agree that sermonizing and storytelling is bad. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to play back the clips of Pinter and Drinker that were just shown, and you guys try telling me how they disagree without some hipster in your ear telling you that they did.
Political theatre presents an entirely different set of problems. Sermonizing has to be avoided at all cost. Objectivity is essential. The characters must be allowed to breathe their own air. The author cannot confine or constrict them to satisfy his own taste or disposition or prejudice. He must be prepared to approach them from a variety of angles, from a full and uninhibited range of perspectives. Take them by surprise, perhaps, occasionally, but nevertheless, give them the freedom to go which way they will. This does not always work. Political language, as used by politicians, does not venture into any of this territory, since the majority of politicians, on the evidence available to us, are interested not in truth, but in power, and in the maintenance of that power. To maintain that power, it is essential that people remain in ignorance, that they live in ignorance of the truth, even the truth of their own lives.
When your writing process consists of about 90% political pandering, always in one direction of course, and predetermined rules about which identity groups are allowed to do what, and maybe 10% actual creative storytelling, well, you end up with stuff like The Savant.
Corporate needs you to find the differences between this picture and this picture. They're the same picture.
He started out his video by saying that objectivity in the arts isn't important, And now he's claiming that subjectivity in politics isn't important, which is equally delusional since subjectivity is heavily ingrained into politics since it includes competing values, different ethical or philosophical priorities, and trade-offs being made to achieve certain goals, which are all normative judgments that are unable to be completely objective. Denying the underlying complexity of politics and treating your political beliefs as absolute objective truths that cannot be reasonably challenged does not make you enlightened or rational. It makes you dogmatic. There is a huge difference between a story having political themes, where you are allowed to listen and draw your own conclusions with what's being presented, versus a story that simply parrots the author's own ideology, bias, or political agenda in the hopes that it will manipulate useful idiots into adopting them. At a certain point, it stops being a story and just becomes propaganda. I don't even necessarily agree with Drinker's takeaway of celebrating a show like The Savant getting cancelled at the last minute due to an event that had nothing to do with the show specifically. Because even if it was most likely one-sided political propaganda, you can't say that for certain since it never came out. So if your criticism had been that there are instances where Drinker allows himself to be influenced by politics despite claiming otherwise, then that would have been a good criticism. But that's not what you did. Instead, you're acting as though political propaganda stops being political propaganda if it parrots your own politics and worldview. So I have no choice but to say that you both fucked up.
To bring up Lady Ballers again, this actually reminds me of some more News' videos on that movie and on conservative comedy. Conservative comedy often isn't funny because it's predicated on a false premise.
Hot take, but Lady Baller's failing had less to do with its politics and more to do with it being both unoriginal and unfunny. It is not the first, second, or even third sports comedy about men pretending to be women to get into female sports divisions. South Park and Futurama even dedicated entire episodes to this concept that are still well regarded to this day because they are actually funny. Family Guy, a show made by liberals, is able to write better jokes poking fun at trans politics.
Excuse me, ma'am. No porn at the bar.
Oh, it's okay. I'm transgender.
Oh, I had no idea. Do whatever you want all the time.
Gentlemen, it's time to start inappropriately touching actresses on the casting couch.
Okay, I have been made aware of the allegations. Is there anything you can say on your behalf?
I'm trans?
You just won HR.
The same is true for Lady Ballers. Men objectively are not infiltrating women's sports, proven by the fact that the movie was originally supposed to be a documentary and they couldn't make that happen.
Now, to be fair, I think I'd actually suggested to the Crane Boys that they do this as a doc.
Yes.
I originally went to them and I said, you guys should go try out for a bunch of ladies' leagues. And that became not possible because, as it turns out, most ladies' leagues don't allow in actual men. And they weren't willing to go the full distance.
Lady Ballers fails in its artistic objective because its very basis is an unfounded foundation.
Criticizing Lady Ballers should be the easiest thing in the world to do, and yet you still somehow fail at doing even that, which is incredible. You're claiming that in order for political satire or political fiction to be effective, then it must address something objectively happening in the real world, which isn't even remotely true. Political satire and political fiction most often center stories around abstract ideas or policy proposals becoming real and exploring the consequences of that. In fact, that approach is one of the most common structures in political storytelling. Even if your claim that men aren't infiltrating women's sports is true, that doesn't change the fact that there are people who actively advocate for the abolition of gender-based sports divisions who can be criticized, which was the idea behind Lady Ballers. So your criticism doesn't make any sense and only unintentionally throws much better political satires and political stories under the bus for no reason. It's also very weird how you went on this bizarre tangent at all when neither Mahler or Drinker even defend Lady Ballers in the first place. Drinker even made an entire video giving it a negative review. Are you not aware that this even exists? He even says the same shit Pincher was saying.
The core premise of the movie, that men competing against women gives them an unfair advantage and risks pushing female athletes out of their own sports, is something that's been tackled already, and arguably better, in shows like South Park. The difference is that while South Park tends to present both sides of an issue and mocks the extreme elements of them before committing to a fairly balanced compromise, Lady Ballers comes down squarely on one side of the issue by pushing it to its most absurd conclusion, two teams of men pretending to to be women so they can compete against each other in the final match before hitting the reset button on the whole thing. For the most part, it's not really as edgy or as ruthless with its subject matter as I expected. In fact, it's almost like it doesn't quite know what to do with the premise once it starts running with it. Apart from showing men physically destroying smaller and weaker female athletes over and over again, the film doesn't feel the need to explore the issue in more depth or complexity.
Brother, why do you refuse to do any level of research for the people you're dedicating a response video to?
It's important to realize how many critics start with a conclusion in mind, like the critical drinker. He often forms his opinions based on the trailer and then has to lie about the movie to make his conclusions fit his expectations. For more on that, you can watch pretty much any video from The Birdman, Anthony Gramuglia, or Otterly Noah on The Drinker.
Okay, so your big gripe against Drinker is that he occasionally makes predictions, and sometimes those predictions turn out to be wrong. In other words, simple mistakes anyone is capable of making. Even if I find this standard to be pretty unreasonable and silly, I'd still be willing to just say whatever if that was really the standard you hold other content creators to. But then you pull this bullshit by showing off 3 clowns who routinely make just as many, if not more embarrassing mistakes than Drinker. Birdbrain is a perpetual liar who constantly gets shit wrong, but lacks the integrity to admit it.
But the rumor is, in this, he'll be connected to Mephisto, which is too stupid to be true to waste a great villain like Mephisto in a show like this, but considering this comes from the same company who decided to lead with the female Silver Surfer in the Fantastic Four, it makes it believable.
Okay, 2 things. 1, there is no way in hell the MCU is debuting Mephisto in this show, and I don't know why you think they're even teasing that. So just like the cynical grifter, your grasp on marketing material is complete and utter dog shit.
Okay.
You can call me Mephisto.
And to someone who is so consumed by culture war bullshit that he couldn't even condemn Neil Gaiman's sexual misconduct at first, because he didn't want to give the people he disagrees with politically a perceived win. And Noah, well, he's a goddamn plagiarist. Just like with Dunkey, him glazing all of these guys reveals that he doesn't actually give a fuck about standards, and is just using it as a lazy attempt to go after creators he doesn't like. In other words, he himself is grifting.
Much like politicians, objective critics try to use their language to cushion their audiences. As Pinter said, you don't need to think, just lie back on the cushion. It's very comfortable. You might argue that I'm doing the same thing with my videos, but I would argue I'm actually inviting critical thinking and dissent with my videos. Since my Megan Fox video, I have never claimed to be an objective critic. I always end my videos asking my viewers to tell me what they think. People disagree with me, and I love that.
You hear that, guys? Him having a lack of standards and being insanely biased is okay, because he lets people reply to him in his comment section. Yippee! I mean, he's at least better than Birdbrain, so that's a start.
With the realities before us, how could we ever expect to leave politics out of art?
And nobody is saying otherwise besides the voices in your head you argue with in the shower.
The only way you can strive for objectivity as a writer is if you lie. By lying, you shield yourself from the scrutiny of subjectivity.
Help! Help! Help me! Help!
This is probably going to age my video a bit since it's referencing a current event, but fuck it, who cares? I find the attitude this guy expresses towards people he disagrees with to be very similar to the hate Timothée Chalamet is receiving over his comments regarding the current state of ballet and opera.
And I don't want to be working in ballet or opera or, things where it's like, hey, keep this thing alive, even though no one cares about this anymore. All respect to the ballet and opera people out there. I just lost 14 cents in viewership, but damn, I just took shots for no reason.
That's not a shot. I hear what you're saying. Yeah. So,
the people out for Chalamet's blood over what he said are being completely unreasonable because what he's doing isn't displaying a disrespect to these artistic mediums or the greatness they're capable of achieving. He's lamenting the fact that they have fallen so far from grace to the point where being creative or experimental is impossible in order to cater to the small group of wealthy donors keeping their industries alive by only delivering the performances they specifically want to see, as if the people involved are trained animals instead of professional artists with a vision of their own. And that's quite the nightmare scenario if you think about it, because it's a creative field where you're not allowed to be creative anymore. This is a perspective that can only really come from someone who has spent a lot of time and passion into these fields. Even though the people going after Chalamet claim to be doing so out of an appreciation for ballet and opera, they will do anything but actually support ballet and opera in a meaningful way.
No one does care about ballet or opera, and that is a hyperbolic way to say it. I wish that Timothée Chalamet said it in a different way, but everyone who works in these fields understands that no one cares, that you are fighting uphill because no one cares. You don't even probably care. You probably just don't like Timothée Chalamet, or you're like on the train of whatever this conversation is, but you probably don't even really care. You don't know who makes this work or what it's about, the artists, their names, where they come from, what institutions they belong to, what those institutions are. You don't visit them regularly or patronize them on a consistent basis. You don't even really care. You know, everyone who works in these fields knows that the subscriber bases are dying. The audience is dying. That's not a figure of speech. It's not a metaphor. They are literally geriatric and dying. It's one of the first things that you learn as a contemporary artist in the fine arts space, is that they are scrambling to find young people to replace their subscriber base, which is why you, in your echo chamber, being in the creative capital of America, New York City, get to go to one of the oldest ballet or opera institutions in the country and go see something for $35. Because they are hemorrhaging money. The Metropolitan Opera just signed a five-year deal with Saudi Arabia so that they can get out of the financial hole that they're in. And there's two things about that. The Metropolitan Opera is one of the most prestigious and longest standing institutions in the country. That's one, that they're struggling. And two, is that you probably didn't hear about that until I just told you, because you don't know anything about the Metropolitan Opera, because you probably don't fucking care, because no one cares. Because no one cares. And no one who works in these spaces is confused about the fact that no one fucking cares. It's actually one of the central obstacles to getting the work done, is the acknowledgement that no one cares and you have to make them. These are multi-million-dollar productions. These are prestigious historic institutions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, begging people to support them, begging people to patronize them, promoting themselves like indie films or like independent unsigned SoundCloud artists. Support your local, support your local this. We got to keep the doors open. And it's the goddamn Met. That's the truth of like the economic and industrial position that these institutions and that this art is in. It's not about whether the art itself is good or valuable or merited. I don't think that that's even close to what Timothée Chalamet, who started out in the theater and has family who has done ballet and done, I don't think that that's what he was trying to argue. I think the reality is that if you want to make art that reaches people, these industries have not built out the infrastructure that reaches people. I grew up in the South loving the arts and watching people argue about whether I should be able to stream a musical from home or not, or if I need to be someone that can fly to New York to see it live and in person for $400 in the balcony. These industries are having the same conversations that they were having 15 fucking years ago, 20, 30 years ago.
This is what meaningful passion looks like. Being able to acknowledge the reality, including the negatives, and not hiding behind wishy-washy sentiments or completely fleeing into abstract subjectivity because you're unable to handle it. I feel as though poetry can also be categorized in the same way as ballet and opera, considering it is just as niche and overlooked, but with even lower standards and barriers to entry, since it requires less talent compared to the other two mediums, which are more physically demanding and rigorous. As a result, you get standards thrown out the window, and mediocrity celebrated not because anything of quality was achieved, but because interest in the art form is at such a low point that any actual engagement or participation with it at all is considered an accomplishment. If there's such a lack of standards in the poetry world to the point where no one can even tell you what is good or bad from a quality standpoint, then that's not exactly the sign of a booming medium, but more so a sign of a dying one desperate to stay alive. Because if no one is ever terrible, then at the same time, no one is ever excellent either.
Everyone's special, Dash, which is another way of saying no one is.
By all means, keep the energy or lack of energy you have towards poetry, but keep it the hell away from filmmaking. Because if you ask me, advocating for what's essentially a great artistic depression to be appreciated as a norm is pretty objectionable. But hey, those are just my thoughts, and if you have any of your own, then feel free to flex them off in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.